So I'm a 28 years old woman, and this happened to me when I was 13. I'm an adult now and still kind of traumatized. For a little context, at 13 I transferred school because of lack of money. This school I went to was a cheaper private school because where I lived the public ones kinda sucked. I didn't have any friends for at least the first couple of months. I started noticing this boy, Victor. He was always staring at me during classes, in the hallways by the window, and at lunch. It was an everyday thing, but I didn't care because as a kid I only thought of stupid stuff like dolls or whatever. Oh, and one more thing. I was flat as a table back then, so I totally looked like a small child. The girls in my class started saying that Victor had a crush on me, which creeped the hell out of me because he was 18. I was creeped out but still didn't care, as long as he didn't approach me or anything. But things escalated quickly. Victor started to follow me home every day. Thank God I moved since then and he doesn't know where I live anymore. The most annoying thing, however, was that he constantly asked his friends to try to talk to me and try to convince me to go out with him and make out with him after school. These talks would usually take about 30 minutes of them trying so hard to convince me to agree with this, while Victor was behind them watching the conversation like a freak. Obviously, I rejected him all the time, but being the nice guy that he said he was, he spread rumors about us making out anyway. Nobody believed anyway because he was such a weird guy, and the whole school knew it. The final straw was when our school had a trip to a book fair. I was super excited. At this point, I had made a couple of friends. On our way to this fair, I was on the bus with my friend, and Victor was on 3 seats behind us, and I could feel his eyes on me the whole way. Out of nowhere, he came and asked for my friend's cell phone, and she gave it to him. So stupid of her. He returned her cell phone not even 2 minutes later. She checked the cell phone and showed me he had taken a bunch of photos of me. I guess this was his way of saying that he had already done this at some point. She got so angry and went to go talk to him. When she returned, she said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. She said this with a very scared face. He said to me that when you least expect it, he will push you into a bathroom and have his way with you today. The only thing that went through my mind was, what should I do now? I looked at him and he gave me a creepy smile. After this, I spent the whole day looking behind my back, not leaving the side of my teacher. She didn't even understand why I didn't want to walk around at the fair. I was in alert mode all the time and thank God nothing happened. When I came home, I cried in my room like a baby. This was at the end of the year and thankfully I switched schools again. I told this to my mom last year and she was like, yeah, it happens. It happened to me too when I was your age. I'm so shocked about how this is such a common thing. I'm now 28 and I still see Victor on the streets. He has followed me around a few times. I always walk in circles until I lose him, but sometimes he waits for me outside of stores and restaurants. I think about what would have happened to me in the book fair if I didn't have my teacher next to me the whole time. And I wondered if one day he'll do something or just keep this creepy behavior. Either way, I always have one eye over my shoulder. This happened a few years ago, right before the pandemic hit. In fact, I know the exact date because it spooked me to my core. It was February 18th, 2020. I was 14 years old, so you can imagine this was a pretty frightening moment for a young girl. My mother, younger brother, and I went to go see a movie. He wanted to see the new Sonic film, and I didn't really want to, so I went to see a different movie. I had already seen the movie, but I wanted to enjoy the cinema popcorn and hot dog, and quite frankly wanted to watch it again. I had gone off by myself to the viewing room, and it was completely empty. Just me in there, so I felt relatively safe being able to see the whole room given I was at the very top. It was pretty amazing to have an entire room to yourself, until it's not. About halfway through the film, I went to the restroom, and once again it was just me in there. Every room was in current running progress, so nobody wanted to miss the films. As I was finishing up, there was an elderly woman at the sink. She looked in her 70s, I think. I thought I was alone, but I suppose not. She was washing her hands right next to me. She had moved from her original spot. Now, for context before I say what she said to me, I'll give you a brief description of myself. I have black hair, green eyes, relatively sharp features, high cheekbones, and arched brows. Yeah, a typical Disney villain, which I somewhat blame for her response. I think I'm somewhat attractive, but nothing to lose your marbles over. She had a look at me with the most subtle but unnerving grin, still with her hands under the water but not doing anything, and said, "Young lady, you are quite a gorgeous girl." I said thank you, and she went on to say, A beauty like that is only something an evil thing can have. Your eyes are just so hollow and soulless, she continued with that same damn smile. I was seriously starting to get creeped out, but I do live in the Bible Belt of Texas, so I chalked it up to her being a nut job. But then she got closer and said, without the smile, "You shouldn't have that beauty." I hurried and left as soon as I possibly could. I did not like being alone with that woman anymore, and I waited outside the restroom where it was populated, but she never came out. After 5 minutes, I went back to the viewing room and was paranoid for the rest of the film. I could not get that crazy lady out of my head. Like, who says that to a kid? I seriously considered getting exorcised by a priest after that encounter. After that, I told my mother. She never let me go alone again until I was at least 16. Never do I want to see that woman again. I still get paranoid after that anytime I'm alone in a public restroom. In fact, I avoid them altogether. Still don't know what to make of it. But that grin will live with me forever. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough. I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not to go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the customers of the bar would stand outside to smoke. When they stood outside to smoke, they would be looking at my apartment. Most of the people who were out smoking kept to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by. Never any issues until one evening. One evening I came home from work. I passed the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared at me. I gave him a slight nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just continued to stare. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock on my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The building only had 8 units and I didn't really know any of the neighbors. I froze because I really didn't want to talk to anyone. But the knocking continued. I finally shouted out, "Who is it?" But there was no response. I shouted again, "Who's there?" And the voice said, "It's Tom." I didn't know anyone named Tom, so I shouted back, "I don't know anyone named Tom. You must have the wrong apartment." The voice said, "You may not know me, but I know you. Open up so we can talk." I went over to the peephole and it was the tall dude from the bar. I loudly said, "Off or I'm calling the cops." I heard his footsteps walk away and heard the building door open and then close. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later I peeked out the window and he was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point I'm freaking out. I called my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police and that in the meantime, him and his brother would come check things out. I call the police and tell them what's going on. They said a car is on the way. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watch out my window and see them approach Tall Dude. Tall Dude takes one look at them and bolts. My landlord and his brother try to chase him, but Tall Dude got away. About 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I give my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "We've had reports of a man matching that description who has been assaulting women. Thank God you didn't open the door." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me part of their investigation was talking to the owner of the bar. The owner called the police when the tall dude reappeared after a few days, and the police responded and arrested him. So, tall, creepy dude from the bar, it was a close call, and I sincerely hope I never see you again. Thanks for watching today's video. Please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. It really helps us out, and until next time, stay safe and never wander too far from the light.